you discussed Novak Djokovic just a little bit earlier, and just Sunday he became the oldest number one in ATP rankings history, 419 weeks now. And meanwhile, I mean, I think the biggest story here is a sudden coaching change. He's saying goodbye to Goran Ivanisevic after over 5 years, 12 Grand Slam titles, just incredible accomplishments with this pairing. Are you surprised he made this move, given it is still pretty early in the season and he really hasn't played that many tournaments in 2024?
I'm a little surprised. I would obviously be less surprised if something didn't seem so off about Novak so far this year. And it might sound harsh. Australian Open semifinal, a loss at Indian Wells in March, and I never really put much stock into what Djokovic does in March because I don't know that he's a player who can actually keep up the intensity 10 or the fitness 10, 11 months out of the year anymore. I don't think he has any interest in doing that anymore. He's trying to peak for the slams. Still, he has at no point in time this year, other than maybe like sets 3 and 4 against Fritz, looked like the best version of Novak Djokovic. So already there is kind of like all right, not ringing the alarm bells yet necessarily, but it has been a strange year. And in that respect, I wasn't stunned, but obviously it's been this incredibly successful partnership. Now, most of the credit always goes to the player, and that's how it should be, and that's how it is. But if we're going to look to Goran and what he can hang his hat on, there has never been a more successful adaptation into, I'm going to say, tennis's old age than what Novak Djokovic has done since turning 30. Like it's never been done in this sport, what Djokovic has done since turning 30. And Goran was overseeing what was a transformative Novak Djokovic, who is playing less defense and doing less grinding, and comes out with a bigger serve and a more deadly forehand, and he's just playing shorter, more offensive tennis. Ivanisevic is the guy who was, at least, I don't want to say he's the guy who made that happen because it's the player. It's always the player. But still, as far as coaching goes, he gets credit for that. The timing is not ideal though, right? It's March, the year just started, and now we head into the summer. Roland Garros, Wimbledon, Olympics, US Open. It all comes pretty quick. So he has to figure out something that he's happy with and something that works. And he needs to get that where he wants it to be quickly.
Gil, I'm on board with you that we've seen there's a lot more we're going to see from Novak Djokovic this year and beyond. It always kind of amuses me when people start doubting a player as great as him, especially with what he did last year, which was not that long ago. But the coaching change that you just discussed with Ben, do you think that he's panicking a little prematurely? Like we talk about how those in the tennis media are maybe, too much recency bias and putting too much stock into his early season struggles. Do you think he's panicking a little too soon, making this switch after only playing a couple of events so far this year?
I'm not sure. The funny thing about this right now is we haven't heard from Goran, and we haven't really heard from Novak other than a social media post. And therefore, we're in a tough position as tennis media because we're trying to have an opinion and we're trying to break down the situation. And we know like absolutely nothing. So that's the tough part. I just wonder, watching kind of their interactions on court recently, if Novak has always felt like Ivanisevic could give him a little bit more in-match on-court coaching. When Ivanisevic started with Novak, it was illegal. It wasn't even a part of the equation. Now it is, and I'm wondering if even before Djokovic started struggling this year, if perhaps he's wanted more in that area. So that's my only I don't want to even call it a theory, but something that's somewhat on my radar. And I'm curious to see who Novak picks next and what the player-coach interactions look like. That will tell us something. It wouldn't be very like Novak to panic because, that there have been there have been plenty of instances, one tournament or one or two tournaments here and there where he's not close to his level, especially March and April. Like there was that year he lost early in Monte Carlo, lost early. Well, actually, I guess he lost 6-love in a final to Rublev in Belgrade after that. And people were starting to ring alarm bells. Novak's not right. And then he rights the ship and does great in Rome and does well at Roland Garros after that. So it looks like that. I get why people would think that, but I would assume that that's not the case.
And Goran obviously is going to bounce back real quick. I'm sure there's going to be players that are lining up already, getting in touch to employ his services. On the flip side as well, I'm sure there's plenty of people who are making it known to Novak in his camp that they would be interested in coaching him. I wonder, have you given any thought at all to what kind of coach might work best with Novak, or who he might be looking for? You've mentioned maybe someone who in a match is going to give him a little bit more of what he needs in those moments. Is there anyone that comes to mind that might sort of check off some of those boxes for you?
I kind of agree with something Andy Roddick said on TC Live. Novak will probably go to somebody familiar here, just because it's not really the time in his career for experimentation or risk taking. When you're that age and when you have important tournaments coming up, the clock is ticking, and there's just no time to play around. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw somebody who has already had association with Novak, like Marian Vida comes back, or Boris Becker comes back. Becker's.
Don't get me excited with Boris Becker. I'm a huge Becker fan, so yeah.
I wouldn't be stunned. They've already had that correspondence. So the key is there. Novak knows what he's getting. And, he's been around the tour a while, so I'm sure there are people who he has relationships and he knows very well who aren't, former Novak coaches, so to speak. But I think whoever it is, it's going to be somebody very familiar to Djokovic and potentially familiar to us as well.